Silent Spring has become one of the most controversial books of the century, and Rachel Carson began it by painting the picture of an imaginary small town suffering from the effects of poisoning from various chemicals. Although the town was a fiction, every case cited had happened somewhere in the United States, and the press of the world reacted to the book with reviews that ranged from reasoned approval to contemptuous hostility. Many papers carried quite extravagant headlines. A farmer's journal told its readers that they were accused of poisoning food. A chemical writer said crisply, "Nature is for the birds." But whether you agree with the book or not, the fact remains that it culminated in special federal action in the United States and a program of more comprehensive controls on the use of pesticides in all fields. These represent most of the pesticides on the market today, about 3,000 of them, and all listed for registration by Act of Parliament in every state of the Commonwealth. Let me say at the start that in one respect, you might accuse this program of being biased, because we have not included the manufacturer's views. We've not done so because we do not deny nor dispute the tremendous benefits that pesticides have conferred, particularly in the past 25 years. But the intensity of the world's reaction to Silent Spring led us to inquire about the Australian situation, and this program is the result. We'll show you evidence of poisoning of people, stock, and wildlife. We'll show you that state and federal authorities are aware of the dangers, but also that lack of money and facilities is preventing the regular checking for chemical residues on every type of food. The chemicals for the control of many pests, and there are alternatives which we will show you. They are worried from the wildlife authorities on the uncontrollable effects of pesticides. Fruit growing districts everywhere use vast quantities of pesticides for the control of orchard pests. Research workers too often have prolonged contact with such chemicals. And both cases of poisoning and rumours of mental illness have been reported at spraying time in Victoria's Goulburn Valley. So at Marutna Hospital in this area, I spoke to two doctors who had surveyed over 300 people at spraying time. No symptoms of poisoning appeared in the survey, but the blood test done by the doctors showed definitely that the people had absorbed the chemical into their system. I also asked the doctors about general cases of pesticide poisoning. Can we go outside your test group and talk about the number of instances of organic phosphate poisoning in this area?
Oh, we would probably in the hospital have at least a dozen each year of people who have been poisoned to a varying degree. Probably each year we would have 2 or 3 who are unconscious on admission. Unfortunately, the majority of those poisoned people are not people in our group, mainly because our group consists of people who are interested in their own welfare, whereas the poison chap possibly tends to be a little careless. We're not sure, but we think this is how they get selected.
What sort of symptoms, Doctor?
The symptoms are really divided into 3. The mild symptoms are those of major gastrointestinal upset. They get diarrhea, vomiting, usually beginning a lot of nausea and giddiness, all these upsetting the gastrointestinal tract.
Do they get over it? Or do they leave?
Most of them get over that initial thing without any help, as long as they don't have not had too big a dose of poison. If they have, they then go on to an effect on all the muscles of the body. They start twitching all over. And in the final stage, they get an effect on the brain itself, and they become unconscious and ultimately completely paralyze all the vital centers and would then die, although we've not so far had a death.
You've had them paralyzed?
We've had them to the stage of almost total paralysis.
From now on, then, for the next few years, you'll be conducting further tests in organic phosphate poisoning?
We hope to continue this for many years and try and determine whether there is any chronic effect from a yearly dosage. It's perfectly well known what the acute effect is, but the chronic effect is a thing that remains unknown.
In 1960, Professor F.H. Shaw of the University of Melbourne made a survey of the Goulburn Valley orchardists to find if there were any connections between orchard spraying with the pesticides and the incidence of mental illness in the area. In effect, Professor Shaw could find no marked evidence linking mental illness and pesticide spraying, but he feels that further research should be done to remove all doubt. The cost of discovering and developing pesticide is staggering. Figures quoted range from £500,000 up to £3 million. The reason is that pesticide hunting involves the manipulation of atoms. It is so expensive that there are only about 12 major companies in the world doing the basic research. From Australia's point of view, the pesticides used here are created and tested initially outside the country. The development of pesticides within Australia is virtually negligible. One such chemical was used in the Heytesbury dairying settlement area in Victoria, and this resulted in perhaps the most outstanding case in Australia to date of the misuse of a pesticide. A pasture caterpillar had been causing serious damage in the dairy pastures. The new chemical was said to be more effective than DDT. About 50 farmers used it. They sprayed it on the pastures and, in accordance with the instructions, kept their stock off sprayed pastures for 3 weeks. The pesticide was put on in March and April, and about 6 weeks later, newborn calves began to die. Every farmer we interviewed had lost calves. Cats and dogs, too, had died. The chemical was found in the milk being used in the homesteads and in the milk going to the dairy factory. Eventually, the milk from this factory was diverted into soap manufacture. An official survey of the affected farms was begun, and 6 months later, the chemical was still being found in the soil and in the milk of cows on some of the farms. I spoke to Mr. W.R. Jewell, previously Victoria's Chief Chemist to the Department of Health and Agriculture, and at present a chemical consultant to the Health Department. Before discussing Heytesbury, I asked Mr. Jewell if there was regular checking of pesticide residues on various foods, such as dairy products, bread, flour, canned fruits.
There is no, to my knowledge, there is no regular checking on that. Again, occasionally a situation develops where an investigation is required as to the pesticide residue in a particular food. But apart from that, in the state activities, there is not at the moment any great amount of regular testing. The Commonwealth analyst, however, is checking export produce regularly for pesticide residues, export produce in the form of meat products, milk and dairy produce, because he's got to be certain that stuff exported is not going to endanger the good name of Australian produce generally by having excessive amount of pesticide residue in it.
It's the chemical causing the problem at the Heytesbury dairy settlement in Victoria earlier this year. Now, is it that this chemical could have been registered without its persistence in pastures and in the soil being known?
Yes, that is possible, but it was registered not specifically for pasture work, and its use at Heytesbury was more or less in an experimental nature. Admittedly, experience has shown that it is very dangerous on pasture, and as you know, its sale has been prevented and registration has been cancelled. It indicates one aspect of the general problem, that with new chemicals, every now and again one will come on the market which has got properties which have not been disclosed by research work already carried out on it. Those occurrences, fortunately, very rare, but under the present setup there's no possibility of completely avoiding them.
You already said, Mr. Jewell, that you're, in this country, are more concerned with the health of our buying public overseas than we are with our normal Australians. In this case, in Heytesbury, milk was not checked for some 5 months, and in that time contained and was marketed containing a dangerous chemical.
Well, I think you're wrong in saying that I suggest that we're more concerned with overseas buyers of our produce than with local consumers. If what I said inferred that, I don't think that's quite right. But as far as the Heytesbury incident is concerned, it wasn't. Some milk did get on the market before it was found out that it contained this particular. It's one of those things, which I said a moment ago, occurs occasionally, but fortunately not very frequently, but ones which you cannot completely avoid.
There was no need for that chemical to be registered in Australia, was there, as there were other chemicals that would do the job just as well?
But there was evidence that this chemical would do it better, and to the farmer at a somewhat lower cost because of the fact that considerably less of it was required than with the chemicals already on the market.
Whereas past history now, it's cost the farmers a lot more.
Yes, and cost other people more too.
Registration appears to be a key point for controlling the use of pesticides. I put it to Dr. Agnes Christophers, Chief Industrial Hygiene Officer for Victoria, that for the protection of public health, registration at present is totally ineffective.
No, I wouldn't say totally ineffective. I think, actually, by itself, this registration, as it's done, would provide a fairly good cover. But I think it has to be said that it's not quite adequate. More needs to be done.
Most of our pesticide problem seems to arise out of the fact that we've permitted the use of chemical bludgeons that tend to kill everything, insects, wildlife, birds, and sometimes humans. Would you agree with this?
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Can you foresee the time when we'll have to make regulations to limit pesticides to those that kill only specific pests?
I think the time is coming, judging by what we hear about what's happening in America. I think this sort of thing will have to come.
Is enough being done in the way of public education and industrial education on safeguards against spray effects?
No, I don't think so. I think this is one of the reasons why this sort of interview might help to put it across to the public what the problems are.
For instance, in the Victoria's Goulburn Valley, there's 35,000 acres of orchards, and in this area, it's sprayed at least 5 times a year. Does your department police the regulations concerning the wearing of protective clothing by orchard workers who are spraying?
Well, actually, our regulations apply only where there's an employer-employee relationship, so that the person who is spraying on his own account is not covered by the regulations. Apart from that, of course, the regulations are inherently very difficult to police. I don't think that we really attempt to police them. We can't. But on the other hand, we do, as much as possible, try to find out what's going on.
There's the problem of drift, Doctor. Spray can drift and particles can settle on the roofs of homes and be washed into water tanks. Do you know where the chemicals are in the water tanks? And is it the business of your department or any Australian health department to know these things?
It would be our business to know. We haven't gone looking for these problems. On the other hand, as far as I know, such problems have never arisen.
The hate spree incident is the only incident in Australia so far that might have earned a place in a book like Silent Spring. But Silent Spring brought action in the United States federal sphere of administration. In Canberra, I spoke to Dr. Alec Johnson, Commonwealth Director of Public Health. He said first that registration is quite definitely the responsibility of each state, but that the Commonwealth is interested in all food additives and contaminants, and therefore in pesticide residues on food. Dr. Johnson then outlined the Commonwealth Poisons Register that has been prepared.
In relation to the Commonwealth Poison Register, this Commonwealth Poison Register, which is currently being compiled, will contain in detail the active ingredients in all poisonous substances, including pesticides, together with antidotes where appropriate, and details of symptoms and treatment. It's hoped to complete the work on the pesticides section of the register within the next 6 months, and this will involve about 3,000 products. The general practitioner and the specialist are faced with a bewildering assortment of trade names, abbreviations, and chemical and structural formulae, and cannot reasonably be expected to be familiar with the toxic effects of all these products. It's equally difficult, indeed, to keep abreast with treatment of the various types of poisoning. And with these problems clearly in mind, and aware of the fact that the administration of the appropriate treatment promptly is often of vital importance, the National Health and Medical Research Council made a recommendation that the Commonwealth Department of Health undertake the task of preparing a poisons register. This work is being carried out within the department in my division, that is the Public Health Division. We're preparing the information in 2 ways. Every poison is being tabulated on a separate card containing, as I said, details of ingredients, antidotes, if any, symptoms of overdosage, and treatment. And there may be ultimately upwards of 30,000 products listed on cards. There may be more. This information is being obtained from world sources, from Australian authorities, and with a large measure of cooperation from the manufacturers. These cards will be forwarded to every state health department.
Man's greatest competitors for food are insects. They were here millions of years before us, and they've developed the ability to survive in a hostile and changing environment. chromosomes in all living cells carry the code, the biological blueprint, which determines the nature of the beast. Now, in a certain type of fly, for instance, they can show you the particular gene on one of the chromosomes that gives the insect immunity to DDT. In other words, the chromosome code is not fixed or permanent. It can be changed when the environment stipulates change. So, I put it to one of Australia's top entomologists that insecticides are self-generating because their use leads to resistant strains of insects which later require stronger chemicals. Dr. D. Waterhouse, Chief of the Biological Division, CSIRO.
This is true, although there are some species of pests, fortunately, which so far haven't developed resistance.
What real hope is there that the chemist can give us a truly selective chemical, one that will suppress one pest and only one?
There are a few such chemicals known, and there's a growing interest in the development of others. The ones that are known are not known perhaps very well. One of them is a material called Wyania, a plant product which is used against cottonmouth, and another is a fruit fly lure.
We know. In our biological control, Doctor, Australia has good examples of success here, the prickly pear and myxomatosis. What is against the further use of this technique?
Well, there are many pests in Australia, both insect pests and weeds, against which biological control could be attempted. And I've got no doubt whatever that some successes would be achieved. The problem, I suppose, is the time scale. If we have more funds and more staff, we can tackle them more rapidly. We do have at the moment perhaps a dozen pests which are being examined from a biological control point of view.
N.T. Frenchy, head of the Plant Pathology Department of the Waite Institute, South Australia, also commenting for us on the future of pest control in Australia.
The use, as we said earlier, of these almost blunderbuss mixtures do pose increasing problems which necessitate increasing safeguards in terms of their usage. I feel we're not spending nearly enough time, energy, and, of course, money on looking at alternative forms of pest and disease control. I think that there's a very critical question arising of the relationship, say, between the commercial companies and research groups. I think that there could be a closer linkage between these so that research which is going along in particular directions, pointing to other possibilities of control, that this research could be capitalized on and taken forward much more quickly if there were collaboration of this sort.
In Canada, farmers in Manitoba were charged with selling contaminated food which contained pesticides. So we ask, must we saddle the farmer with the responsibility of selling uncontaminated food in an industry which demands that he uses pesticides for his financial survival? Naturally, with all the improvements, the economics of farming has changed too. Today it's big business. It costs $15,000, $20,000 or £30,000 to get into orcharding or dairying or mixed farming, even on a modest scale. So the farmer himself demands effective pesticides, and reasonably the manufacturers compete to satisfy the demand. But today's pesticides are mostly bludgeons that blindly kill friend and foe alike.
And it's our wildlife population that gets the worst end of this. Mr. Dunbarton Butcher, head of Victoria's Fisheries and Wildlife Department.
Where does the greatest danger to wildlife lie? In farming and grazing areas or in timbered country?
I think in timbered country, because the development of the state wildlife, the greatest concentration, with many species, not every species, but many species, is in the timbered country, and there the threat lies. By the way, I'd like to make this point, it's not altogether a direct threat. We are concerned about the very broad impact of chemicals on the flora itself and the general habitat, and if the ecology is badly disturbed, that again is going to affect your wildlife, and the biggest impact there again will be in the timbered country.
Well, do you expect that wildlife in intensively farmed areas must suffer, and that there's little you can do about it?
I think at the present stage the answer is yes, there will be a heavy loss in clear country, farmland. I don't think I'll be quite as pessimistic to say we've got to accept this. I think improved approach to the use of pesticides, and I think a little bit less indiscriminate use, we can even reduce the loss in this field, although we do accept there must be some loss.
Well, do you believe perhaps that indiscriminate slaughter of all forms of wildlife by pesticides will ultimately affect farm production?
Well, I think so. It is a field of very considerable debate. People who believe in chemical control, people who believe in natural controls. I think there's some middle course in this, and I think that, I believe that the control of many insects by wildlife is significant, and we would lose very, very badly if we destroyed wildlife over this sort of country.
Since interviewing Mr. Butcher, his department has begun a survey to discover the quantities of residue chemicals in fish and other wildlife. There are indications that insecticides are present in trout from certain lakes in Victoria. Pesticides have made a massive contribution to world food production and world health. But I believe that we've shown in this program that informed opinion is beginning to favour chemicals that are more selective in their action. The day of acceptance of the chemical blunderbuss seems to be passing. Dr. Otto Frankel of the executives of CSIRO expressed his view of man's future control of pests.
We've got to learn to go back. In fact, to find a new balance in nature where we are part of it, where we don't keep on being driven by the forces that we ourselves are unable to control. When the chemical warfare that we have started turns on us, and the poisons we made for parasites become our poisons, and from the poisons that we so cleverly designed fail to work. Now, this requires a great deal of thought, of maturity, and an enormous amount of research. We have ways in which we can think we can approach the problem. We can try and understand the systems very much better than we do. We can attempt to control nature by using methods that nature herself uses. For example, when we want to use biological control for insect pests or for weeds, then we can breed controlling insects, controlling parasites. We can play the part that nature plays, has played, and will play over centuries by herself. We can aid nature. So these are ways that are open to us, many of them. Biological control is something that has been mentioned by others. And we can make this very much more effective. We can breed for resistance. Much of this has been done, but far more remains to be done. But on the whole, we ourselves must become a stabilizing factor, not only in getting to live in nature, but becoming part of the system by controlling our own numbers, by exerting the kind of control on our own population that we demand of the population of all other living beings.
Nature off balance